So yeah, I'm going to just start from being one of the founders of Triratna. And when we moved to Cornhill Farm in November 1985, we didn't have a name for the place. We'd been playing around with some different names and nothing had really resonated. And we'd asked Bhante for some suggestions and he'd come up with a few and none of them clicked. And when I say, they didn't click with us, the us was the then quite small band of women order members who, until the inception of Triratna, pretty much planned, organised and led between them most of the retreats and events that were being offered for women getting more seriously involved in Triratna worldwide outside India. I mean, there were some Dharmacharinis out in New Zealand and I think and in Australia, and they did some retreats, but people would come over, make that long whole journey to come over for a sort of a much bigger event over here. At that time there was, I'm not sure whether there were any women involved even in North America, for instance. The movement was still quite small. Anyway, at some point after having moved to Cornhill Farm, I was in the bathroom that's off of the community kitchen, and I was kind of cleaning my teeth and looking in the mirror, as I did sometimes. And anyway, this face floated into my mind, and it was the face of a young Malaysian woman order member called Jaya Pushpa. And I'd lived with Jaya Pushpa in community in London, in Bethnal Green, for 2 or 3 years. And we'd become friends. And she'd come over from Malaysia on the back of having read some articles by Bhante in a Buddhist journal and written to him. And very courageously, left home and went forth and came over to the other side of the world, not knowing anybody. I feel she touches my heart. Didn't know anybody, and joined our community. And she was ordained within 2 years. She came on a work visa and worked in the cherry orchard. But sadly, because of the visa restrictions, she had to go back to Malaysia. She had no choice but to go back to Malaysia very soon after her ordination. And when she was ordained, which was in the Norwich, the previous Norwich Buddhist Centre, with an order member called Jayashri, she took the green Tara practice. And Bhante gave her this really beautiful, small green Tara rupa, one of his own green Tara rupas. And I remember that those of us who were there at the public ordination being very struck by him giving her this gift. We could sort of tell it was a really precious gift to give her. And my sense was that he was giving it to her, well, one, because he loved her, but also because he knew it was going to be so hard for her to go back to Malaysia and be on her own, and that this would be a support to her. And even back then, she was a very deeply committed Dharma practitioner and meditator. So when she came into my mind in Cornhill Farm, Green Tara came into my mind as well, straight away. And with Green Tara, this name, Triratna, just appeared. And it was one of those moments where it was a bit like, well, of course. And it was like, how come we never thought of this? How come it never occurred to us? Because it just seems so obvious once it had arisen. I can't remember, to be honest, but I'm sure I did consult the other... I'm sure I did consult the other women order members. I can be quite individualistic, but I think I did consult them. I think everybody said, yeah, great. And so Triratna came into being, and it just seemed as if as soon as we had that name, it was like something else began to happen. It was a bit like there'd been this vision of we need a retreat centre. And And it was an inspired vision that we had, but in a way it was also quite nuts and bolts. We need a retreat centre so we don't have to keep lugging cushions and mats and all the rest of it. We've got a facility and then we can run retreats. But it's like suddenly, it's like the deeper meaning just really came alive. And I really believed in the myth of Tara. It was a bit like instantly I was like awake to the myth of Tara, and like it was a bit like the moment before I was completely not awake to it. And it was like suddenly it was like, oh yes, that's what we're here for. This is what we're about. That it was suddenly this sense of, yes, our job as a community, living and working on what at that stage was a pretty desolate piece of land with, you know, a load of dilapidated barns and a not terribly attractive community house, you know, on the borders of North Shropshire and Wales. And it was like, what we were about was, our job was to create an environment of beauty and harmony that brought into the world the qualities that were kind of there, as it were, on a mythic level in this myth of Tara Loka. And I really felt I could put myself behind that myth, and you know, we used to talk it up quite a lot in those days, because in a way we didn't have much else. On another level, you know, it was pretty rough and ready. You know, there was all sorts of things that happened in that community in the early days, well, you know, which were kind of pretty messy at times, and I certainly played my part in that. But we had this vision of what was possible if we, you know, if we stuck it out together and worked on ourselves, worked together and put on these retreats. So that process began, I think, with that name, the naming of the place, and it's continued over the decades since then. So I left Tara Loka in early 1993, and so that was just over 7 years after it was founded. And then in 2005, I moved back to the area and spent 3 years living on the other side of the canal from Tara Loka. And I lived there in semi-solitude. I was painting, meditating, reflecting, and at times emerging and spending time with some of the women I'd ordained. And I'd felt drawn to put myself back into the orbit of Tara's realm. And maybe a year into my time there, I began to work on a large life-size painting of green Tara. And actually a young woman called Mel, who was helping in the office at the time at Tara Loka, came over and very kindly sat for me, modelled as Tara. She had lovely long black hair, and she'd sit there modelling for me for this painting of Tara. Anyway, I mean, over the next couple of years while I was working on this painting, it suddenly, it's a bit like it gradually dawned on me that although I'd moved away from Tara Loka all those years before, that the myth lived on in my heart and mind. And it was a bit like, it was the first time I realised, oh, Tara Loka isn't place specific. I carried this myth with me. And it was just that it wasn't so visible to me, because I wasn't in this context where I was kind of working alongside these other women in this place specific, where I was, you know, we had this vision of building something. So I suppose this realisation that the myth lived within me, regardless of where I lived, was both heartening and sobering. The sobering aspect was that I recognised that to the extent that I wasn't vividly alive to that myth, I suffered. You know, I realised that I needed to live my life in the context of a felt sense of being within a meaningful myth. And when I lost contact with that, even though, you know, I was working for our Sangha, working in our Sangha, it's like everything had a sort of became grey and flattened. There wasn't that depth of purpose or meaning. So that was the sobering aspect. But the heartening aspect of having realised that this myth had had been alive in me all the time, even though I hadn't been literally living at Taraloka. It felt a bit like the Buddha's earth-touching mudra, because it was a bit like realising, oh yeah, this dimension, come awareness, it's ever present, whether I'm consciously aware of it or not. My task, as it were, is to be more conscious, stay more conscious, or be more conscious to it. And I guess I was entering the territory of time and eternity, the transcendent myth being eternally present, the practice of learning to live from that which is beyond time and space, in the midst of time and space, and not getting bogged down in all the kind of constraints and limitations of the constructs of time and space. So I don't know if I've managed to express that very well, but I'm choosing to talk about the myth of Tara, but I could equally be talking about the myth of Amida, who's been making his presence felt in my life quite strongly over the last couple of years. Or I could be talking about the myth of of Manjughosha, who's my yidam. Or Vajrasattva, who's also been at times an important figure in my life. Or White Tara, or Kuan Yin, there's so many of these archetypes that at different points in my order life have spoken to me or do speak to me. And they're all about time and eternity. They're all about the mystery and the beauty of the beyond and how that interacts or comes into being in the world of here and now. It's all about how the great love and compassion of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas finds expression through our more limited forms, as it were. And the fact that all beings suffer through not being awake, as it were, or alive to that deeper, broader, more expansive truth. And in Cambridge, where I have a bedroom in the house, I share Sadhgada's house with her, and I have this bedroom where I've got quite a lot of images of these archetypes around the wall. I've got them in painted form, photo form, rupa form. And for me, that really supports my Dharma practice. These images, the images in my room, when I look at them, it's like they all speak to me of beauty. They all speak to me of great love. They all speak to me of something mysterious that they feel like they speak to me on levels that I can't translate into words, and they definitely support my my need to live my life within a myth. So that brings me on to the image that we've talked about a lot on this Order Weekend, the image of our order as the 11-headed, 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara. And I do think this is one of Bante's greatest gifts to us, this offering of this image to help us understand what we're about as an order. And I think because of the work I was doing in our Sangha back in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, I was involved in pretty much all of the ordination retreats that were happening in that period. And I was often involved in, what was in those days called the order induction part of the post-ordination bit. After you've been ordained, you do this order induction. And so again and again, I'd be kind of pondering this symbol, because we would usually bring it in, of course. And I think it gradually sunk in more through having to kind of work that material again and again and try and communicate something, whether myself or someone else on the team, about that image. So I suppose it sunk into me more what it was we were doing, what we're part of. And I suppose I feel that for me as an individual, contemplating the vastness and immensity of the Bodhisattva ideal, particularly as expressed in some of the Mahayana sutras, it's awesome. But it's overwhelming. It can feel totally impossible. Of course it is. It's totally impossible in a way, and that's the point. Because it's a sort of, partly the sutras are a method to help just break down your conceptions completely. But yes, it doesn't seem humanly possible to be what those sutras are communicating. And yet they have been composed by humans, or beings who were once humans, have imagined that deeply, that vastly, and have given us these sutras. And as Spante has said, what we imagine, we become. And on the Women's Order Convention here at Adhisthana this summer, 2 senior women in our order were publicly rejoiced in. And as the rejoicings were voiced, as the qualities they were perceived as embodying and giving expression to in their respective lives were named, it became clear that the Bodhisattva spirit was indeed alive and well in those 2 women. That in their own unique ways, they were without doubt giving expression to the qualities that they'd been contemplating in their chosen yidam since their respective ordinations several decades before. And these are just 2 of the women in our order. And there are more with this depth of practice, and dharmacharis too. And if we step back, as it were, and consider the order as a whole, I think we can say that between us, albeit to varying degrees, the Bodhisattva spirit is indeed at work amongst us. It is the overarching myth of our order. It is this spirit that moved Bhante to establish the order in the first place. And he's given the whole of the rest of his life to supporting the continued growth of the order and movement, very much as an expression of his bodhisattva vow. And I hope that between us we'll keep building the conditions so that more and more people across the world are, given the opportunity to step into this body, and bring their qualities into this body, and become yet another arm into the world for the benefit of all.